The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order! The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Will you all rise for the Honorable Judge Bangs?
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus 10, a 1979 romantic comedy about a successful songwriter who, amidst a midlife crisis, falls in love at first sight and follows the woman on her honeymoon to Mexico. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. People of the court, my distinguished opposition, and gentlemen of the jury, 10 is not a 10. Oh, sure, it is tendacious watching a privileged fop pursue questionable conquests and achieve them with no moral recriminations. The plot could be described as attenuated, as we, the audience, are dragged from one offbeat bit of physical comedy to one more missed phone call to a stolid Mexican resort. As a bit of existential drama comedy, we are left. I got more. We are left wanting, as no serious issue is resolved, no lesson learned, and the movie ends with a resounding thud back at square one. So please take 10 seconds, that is, to vote guilty. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schlender. Now, appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Simon Majumdar. Please present your opening statement.
Well, first of all, I think if I had known that this was just going to be people making bad puns, I wouldn't have come on the show. Wow. If that's your argument, well, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am going to put forward a proper answer. You see, for me, 10 is all about the witness. I witnessed this film in the cinema in 1979, when most of you probably weren't born. When?
Yeah.
Thank you for confirming that. That's made me feel even older.
My dad wasn't even born.
Okay, I am. Yes, there's my case. No, I watched this film at 15 years of age, where I first got to see Bo Derek. Now, that would be enough, because Bo Derek in 1979 was a wondrous, wondrous lady. She is now as well. But this was a film that also starred Dudley Moore, one of the most underrated comedians of the 1960s and 1970s. This was a film directed by Blake Edwards, a man who produced Breakfast at Tiffany's and all the Pink Panther films. This was a film that starred Julie Andrews. I'm just going to say that again. This was a film that starred Julie Andrews. Now, that means, anyway, it's a film that should be a 10 anyway. This was the biggest film of its generation and introduced lots of young men like me to ladies at that age. So for me, this is a film that will always have a special, special memory. One of the most elegant, funny, and emotional films of its day. I rest my case. Oh, don't rest.
Don't rest that. Don't rest yet.
Okay, we're done now, aren't we? I'll be off.
Thank you, Simon. Prosecution.
You just let me know how it got on.
But thank you, Simon. Prosecution, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Thank you, Your Honor. And the passion that Simon brings to the table notwithstanding, I feel this case will invariably revolve around Dudley Moore and his character, George Webber. So let's look at this. Who is George Webber?
Dudley
Webber
Moore.
is... What is this?
Dudley Moore.
Well,
He's
yes,
Dudley
okay. Okay, we're getting caught in the loop here. But let's explore it in the context of the movie. Webber is a highly successful musician with no shortage of wealth and no shortage of class. He has a wonderful, statuesque girlfriend.
British. Object. Well, you don't need to say that because he's British.
That's sustained. That's sustained. British people do have a lot of class.
That's true, as our friend Jeremy Black will almost certainly tell us as well. And Matthew J. Elliott, maybe not so much. So, he has a wonderful, statuesque girlfriend, portrayed by Julie Andrews. And then we learn Webber has just turned 42. To his dismay, he feels that despite his success, wealth, friends, love, and any number of great things in his life, he needs more. In what can only be...
Object. You're saying that as if it's a bad thing. I don't know that any of you have turned 42. I have, many years ago, and I can testify that that happens to even the best of men, like myself.
Simon, I have no doubt that you are of much higher character than George Webber. It would almost be impossible not to be. So, what we're treated to, though, is probably the first time this has ever happened in real life or in a movie. An older man is lusting after a beautiful young woman. Stop the presses. This is a scandal, right?
How unconventional.
Very. So, but okay. So here's where this starts to turn.
So again, object.
Yes.
May I object? Can you?
Yes.
Yes. Can you? Can you please tell me if you're criticizing him for something that has happened in every movie since about 1910?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I don't think that you can do that because many movies have been made before or since using this trope. And so I don't think you can confine this just to one film.
And I'm saying it's particularly unoriginal in this case, sir. But here's the real turn. Never mind the lusting after the young woman. Webber does nothing to demonstrate that he deserves any of the things he desires outside of just the fact that he really wants them. He is crass, and he is rude, and he is very unsympathetic. He treats his friends grotesquely. I will refrain from some of the language he uses to describe his best friend, despite our explicit rating that we have at the beginning of the show.
Well, we appreciate that.
We look at his relationship with Julie Andrews, and this relationship seems to be built on sand. Their connection is never really explicitly stated. A shared interest in music and intellectual pursuits can be inferred, but it is never explored in a meaningful way. So, where does this leave us? We are left not wanting to root for George, and finally, when he does get to Mexico, despite all we know about George and his manifest shortcomings, Blake Edwards wants us to cheer him on as he is not only needlessly cold to a potential love interest, but he finally gets to bed the Dream 10 girl as portrayed by Bo Derek. When this goes sideways, though, as we see at the end of the movie, it's not even George's fault. This awkward lovemaking is shown that it's Bo Derek's fault because she's not living up to his fantasy. This is presented as her shortcoming and not George's. There's no lesson here. So George has led a charmed and blameless life, and his comeuppance never arrives. He is a hideous little man, and the audience is left, quite rightly, confused about what the point of him really is.
Thank you, prosecution. Defense, do you have any rebuttals to this? Is Dudley Moore likable?
So, in my response, let me start. Your final statement about the audience being unsure what the purpose of him is something that people have said about me too. So,
we love you, Simon. We know it. We're your audience. We love you.
So I think I can respond to that. First of all, I think part of the prosecution's fault here is that they are looking at this film with very much today's eyes. This is very much a film of its time, and yes, there are very many problems with it. But I don't think that you can judge a previous film with a film that was made at the point. It was made with the It was made with the views of the time, and maybe some of those were misogynistic. So I will definitely take that on board, but I don't think that you would make this film today. But we have to look at it in the eyes, we have to look at it in the eyes of 1979, and 1979 was a very different time. Let's start about the positives of this film. First of all, I think it is all about Dudley Moore. Let's talk about Dudley Moore. Dudley Moore, to my mind, was not only one of the great comedians as I said, of the 60s and of the 70s and into the 80s with Behind the Fringe, with Arthur, which came a little later, but all his other films. In this, I think he was showing his dramatic purpose. He was showing his ability to show emotion, to show coldness. You would show this very differently today, but what he was showing is the coldness of wealth, the coldness of success. And in that, I think it was one of the great performances of the 1970s and was recognized so at the time. Secondly, we see Julie Andrews, a woman who, in my mind, is a great dramatic actress, had been overshadowed by the fact that she was Mary Poppins, the fact that she was in,
Sound of Music.
Sound of Music.
Julie Andrews overshadowed by the fact that she was in Sound of Music, the fact that she was in Mary Poppins. But here, showing her elegance, showing her stoicism. And I think in that case, their relationship was very similar to the relationships that I saw in people in the 1970s. People had great economic wealth, being unable to kind of connect to each other. Thirdly, we have Bo Derek, who was really introduced in this show by Blake Edwards. He could have made her very unsympathetic, but I think he actually made her very sympathetic, and a reaction to the coldness of Dudley Moore. And thirdly, let's just think about the director. Let's think about the films that he made. Things like Breakfast at Tiffany's, things like all the Pink Panther films. And here I think he was able to bring together one of the great ensemble casts of the 1970s. So, yes, the film has some problems. And definitely when you watch it now, and when I watched it now, I was like, they wouldn't do that now. Of course they wouldn't. But you have to look at it in the context of its time. And in that time, what we are seeing is a perfect example of a film of the late 1970s, of affluence, of unsatisfied relationships, of misogynistic views of women. So I don't think you can criticize the film for being something you don't like now.
Well, I think you can make the argument that even at the time, you could see how everything could turn in on George and he could maybe learn a lesson from all of this. But basically the moral, such as it is in the story, was, yeah, his life was fine and he should stay in his lane. And even though he can get everything he pursues after, maybe it's not worth going for. But I take what you're saying, and I just think you can look at this movie through the prism of today. You can look at it from 1979 and see that George Weber's a jerk. Yeah, I mean, like his friends thought he was a jerk, so but that's where I'm coming down.
I think the problem with this is that you're trying to, again, to look at films as they're made today. And one of the things about 10 is they wanted to show that he was a jerk. And the fact that the film earns unsatisfactorily to many people and to his friends in the film is a showing of what 1979 was like. Again, having been around at that point in time, they had the courage in this film to show that a person can be a horrible person. I think we've fallen into this trap with movies in the in the 2000s and as we are now, of the fact that everyone has to learn a lesson. And in a lot of films before that, particularly in the 1970s, when things were a little kind of more rough around the edges, you didn't have to. And that's what I love about this film. It is a film that is a challenge to viewers watching now. Whereas I don't think a lot of the films we get now are. They end with, some kind of folksy little ending that someone has learned a lesson. However dramatic they are, we don't need that. And I think we've missed that in our films. the great filmmakers of the 1970s and the 1980s, as Blake Edwards was, are showing that people don't have to be, are showing that people don't have to learn a lesson.
But it's not just about learning a lesson. You see, it's that everything breaks in a way that's favorable to George. The shortcomings that he has are not his problem. They get projected onto the other characters. The unsatisfactory lovemaking with Bo Derek was portrayed as her problem, like her being married to like this doofy husband, her problem. So all these things were happening around him. But so I think we gave the jury enough about George, and I want to move on to my next point. The exploration of George and his failings really only covers the first and last part of the movie. So we really can't ignore how muddy and malformed the middle of the movie is. We have George's craven stalking behavior, which is always punctuated with bizarre slapstick, bee stings, extreme dental work, falling down a hill, falling into a pool. The physicality here does nothing to buttress any of the main through lines of the film, and are overly long to the point of feeling like padding. The nurse being really odd in the dentist scene, the singing priest, for example. So the audience is tortured by this bizarre spectacle, which is then dragged out even more with the only 40-minute phone tag sequence ever put to film. I mean, how many times can telephone mishaps be leveraged for comedy? Edwards vowed to find out, and it turns out the answer is maybe once, but he went for 10 times. That's why the movie's called 10. 10 missed calls. So why does he do this? You have to look at his background, right? You had mentioned the Pink Panther movie. So this is also very redolent, but ultimately too derivative of Georges Feydeau, a famous French playwright that marketed in farce, misunderstanding, confusing love stories. So between Feydeau and Ravel, the French are very well represented, though wholly mistreated in this film. And I want to end this point with Ravel's criticism of his own piece, Bolero, which I think is very apt for 10. He said of his own piece, "There is no form, properly speaking, no development, no or almost no modulation."
So, defense, do you have any rebuttal to this? Could this whole film been avoided with the advent of text messaging?
Well, again, and it is one thing I come back to, the films of the 1970s were longer. And, when people go to the cinema, they were going for 2 hours. They'd probably have an intermission in between. So in terms of the length, I think it was the length that was meant to be. In terms of the slapstick, people wanted slapstick from Dudley Moore. They'd seen him in Bedazzled. They'd seen him, in other films before this. So they were looking for slapstick. Now, the slapstick is a little overdone. That I will grant you. But people were looking for Dudley Moore to do what Dudley Moore did.
No, in this case, so far I have discussed the who, George Webber, the what, which is the plot and structure such as it is. So now let's look at the why. Why was 10 made? And I think actually Simon brought up a very interesting point about it's not necessarily about him learning a lesson, right? That could be maybe that post-Watergate feel that the country was going through at the time. But it is not dramatic enough to be a drama, and it's not funny enough to really be a comedy. What this really feels like is an autobiographical venting of the spleen of Edwards onto the film. Yeah, venting of his spleen. It means when you're getting your anger out, you vent your spleen all the time, Maynard. So, given how unsympathetic George is and how meandering the plot is, we struggle to find the purpose, but I think it's fair to extrapolate that it's something about pursuit and realization. Robert Ebert called it in his review terminal yearning. What the heck does that mean? Roger Ebert doesn't really say, because the pursuit here is wholly ignoble, and the realization that George Webber has is not that the grass is greener on their side, but rather there is no grass. There's no green grass. So just existing as we said, a successful and wealthy man will have to suffice as the baseline. That's my long way of saying Ebert was a hack who probably saw himself in George Weber. And
Ebert?
Yes, Ebert was a hack.
Fired.
Terminal yearning. Terminal yearning. What is that? I rest my case.
No. Roger
Defense
Ebert,
won't let him get away with that.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think some things just have to be said. Roger Ebert was the man who said that cinema was a machine for empathy. So anyone who can say that is not a hack.
Mm.
I don't know. That sounds like a kind of a hack thing to say. But
Whoa.
Not when you're
Get out of here, Ebert hater.
Not when you're the first person to say it. Now, now
I'm on Team Siskel. Siskel for life.
Thumbs down, prosecution. Defense.
All right.
I don't know that you have to choose between the two. Now, to answer your point, I think that 10 is coming a time when men are beginning to change what they were in society. We are beginning to see much more of the empowerment of women, and we see that with Julie Andrews. And I think in this film, we're seeing very different appraisals of women than we've ever seen in films before. And I think that's why this film was so successful in its time. It was watched by as many women as it was men. The cinema, when I went, I remember going on a date, and it was at a time when people had not seen this kind of action from women as much before, or when they had seen it, it had been seen in things like, kind of pornography almost. They had seen women in power in things like, The Devil and Miss Jones and all of those kind of films. This was one of the first films where you're seeing some women in control of men, and you're seeing Dudley Moore really suffering in this. Now, yes, it's changing the way that yes, it's changed now how we will see this. Now you would see him kind of running about on his own at the end because nobody wanted him. You would see all his friends, letting him go. You'd see all of those. Now, that's how we look at it now. At that time, this was a very powerful film, and it was the best. It was the most successful film of the time. Now, going back to Dudley Moore, now this is a time when we're seeing people showing his slapstick and his emotion together. And I think that was something that people hadn't seen about him. Now, I think that Blake Edwards was in his pomp here. I think it's his best film, and that's including Breakfast at Tiffany's.
I was about to say, what about Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Well,
I remember.
I love.
We both kind of liked it.
Yeah. Did I? Oh gosh.
I'm sorry. I can't help myself.
Well, that's one thing we've got.
I'll allow it. No, you were right. This was all going to be bad puns. I'm sorry.
Now, so I think you are looking at it in the wrong time, and I've said that all the way through here. But I am a witness. You are not a witness.
Actually, you're the lawyer.
I think that's fair, Simon, and I think you might have something with this idea of Roger Moore coming across as a wholly emasculated.
Roger Moore?
What?
Roger Moore. No, not Roger Moore. Dudley Moore. The Dudley Moore coming across as a wholly emasculated figure. He's short, he's ugly, he's not funny, and he does let these women kind of run his life.
I've told you. No talking about me.
No. I don't know if people know this. Simon is 6'4" and jacked. I don't know if people ever seen him.
What is it? I don't know that you could get two different actors than Roger Moore and Dudley Moore.
No, you're right. And Roger Moore is very traditionally masculine in a way where Dudley Moore kind of represents this new post-Watergate masculinity, which did a disservice to the culture. We don't want men acting like Dudley Moore. And for them to be able to see him acting like this and getting away with this, that's a bad lesson in 79, 2009, and 2021.
I don't think you're seeing Dudley Moore as Blake Edwards expected you to see him. I think you're seeing him as we do in 2021. And yes, from that point of view, I think if we're looking back now, it's probably one of the reasons that 10 isn't on any streaming devices too much. It's not on, a lot of things. It's very much of its time. But, I think you have to look at its time. And that's my kind of key point to all of this, is it is a film of its time. And, you can't look at it from 2021.
But
question from the bench for the defense. In your opinion, how would Blake Edwards think we should be viewing Dudley Moore?
I think he's looking at someone who has got immense wealth, immense talent, but I think Blake Edwards is showing us that doesn't give you anything. But if you've got someone who is cold, who has always been given what they want, their act of trying to serve their kind of emotions is often very faulted, is often very stilted, and that's what we're seeing there. Now, that doesn't mean that it's pretty to look at. It's not. Roger Moore, you've got me doing it. Bond. With Dudley Moore, it's looking at a person who just fails. He's just a failure, but that's the film. And it will make you angry. And it does show you that he treats his wife horribly. It does show you that he treats his friends horribly. It does show you that he treats Bo Derek horribly. But that's what was intended. And I think asking a film to do something that we would expect now in a film that was made 42 years ago and is just, I think the wrong thing to do.
I mean, I would contend that it was wrong in 79 as well. I think you could have more traditional versions of masculinity, like a Clint Eastwood type, wouldn't be as like this dandyish that Dudley Moore is, and just being so mean and puerile all the time, So I think there was a competing standard, and I think Blake Edwards bet on the wrong horse. That would be my objection.
Right, now, I have a question for the prosecution, if I may.
Please.
It's highly irregular, but please continue.
If he can call Dudley Moore Roger Moore, I can do anything I like. Now, why do you think that this film was not just popular, it was immensely popular? I believe the biggest film of the year. And why, if she was the baddie in the way, if you're saying Bo Derek, why did she become the most almost iconic person, particularly of that year, but certainly of a period where, the scene of her coming out of the water in a, beautiful swimsuit with her hair in cornrows became iconic?
All right, so 2 parts there, and I have answers for both of them. Why was this movie so popular and well received? The critic class loved this because they were able to see themselves in George Webber, right? They were able to see themselves as these successful men about town who could have whatever they wanted without any recrimination. And that is an ideal fantasy, a boyish fantasy that men have. And when they can watch that and they can self-insert as Dudley Moore, it makes them feel good about the terrible life decisions they've made. Why was Bo Derek so popular? She was hot.
I sustain that.
I would say that what we're looking at here, Simon, what we have with this movie is a dereliction of duty on what it really means to be a man. A man does not act the way Dudley Moore does. He does not go gallivanting across the countryside, stalking women, lusting after women, going to strange sex parties. What he should be doing is being faithful to his beautiful girlfriend and living and enjoying his life and counting his blessings, not dissing them.
The court considers that boring. Defense, how do you...
Yes, I understand this idea here. I think what Simon is hinting at is this idea, so we have liberated women in this movie. Julie Andrews is a very strong woman. She's a single mother in this movie. But we also have the other side of that coin that you started seeing in the late 70s is this kind of idea of like the liberated man, the man who wants to be a Peter Pan, who never wants to have to grow up, never has to take responsibility. And when you have the wealth, talent, and success of a George Weber, you can realize that fantasy and you can live it out. And if it doesn't work, zero cost to you. You're fine. You can go on with your life. It is not a good lesson to take, and I feel that Blake Edwards was lionizing that lifestyle with Dudley Moore instead of offering any substantive critique. And now maybe that's fine. Maybe people want to live that kind of life. I think on the main, it is not a good way to go.
Now, I will say you were being sexist. Because you
said...
how
am I being sexist?
Yeah, wow. I mean, wow, what you said. Wow.
Okay.
Because you said all of the critics were men. You basically said they were. That's what you said. Now
I said the critic class.
You're basically saying that all of the criticism of it, and I mean critic in the true sense of the word, rather than just saying I like, I don't like, but the real no, a lot of the criticism of it was by women. And I mean that in the sense of the true critics. So I'm afraid just your point that it's all men looking at it and going, this is our life and we love this because we have lots of money and lots of women running over us is absolutely wrong. And also, Bo Derek is hot. She's also very strong. And also, as I can tell with the date that I went there with when I was 15 or whatever, they were all looking and going, she is everything we want to be at the time. Now, again, that may not date so well because at the time, it was people looking glamorous, and it was the days when we had fashion pageants and people wandered around in bikinis. Again, not something we should do now, not something we should ever do now. But at the time, it was considered very, very powerful. And the audience was very democratically split between, the men and the women. So I think your argument is very one-sided. It's almost sexist. Almost you should leave now. Write us a letter. Write us a letter, just apologizing for what you did. I can put it online. I can hold it up on one of the shows just to show that you are a reprehensible man, even if not an age. I can show you. I can get you help if you want.
Yes, he needs to help, Simon.
What you're doing. You want to be George. That's what's going on here.
No.
You want to be. You're criticizing him because you want to be George. You want to go and meet Bo Derek. You want to go and be married to George. I can see it. And I get it because I was there, but you are putting your own kind of almost dark sexism on this film that at its time was providing great emotional drama for people and showing them Bo Derek at her absolute pomp and being made by one of the great directors in the world. And I think you should just be sorry. If I was you, I would go and stand in the corner of the room, and we'll come and get you later when you've learned your lesson.
All right.
Oh,
so Simon
fantastic.
is kicking me off my own show. I love it. I think
one of the.
Got the clip.
That's one of the best. That's one of the best putting someone in their place that this courtroom has seen, and long overdue, Simon. So here. Simon, do you have any last points you make before you rest your case?
Yes, I will say that seeing 10 again after a long time, because as I said, it's not shown as much because of the valid arguments that I think the prosecution make about how it would be seen now. I found it to be a very elegant, very well directed, very funny view of a man who has everything and yet has nothing. And that's a feeling that I think any man now, any person now would understand. So I think this is a film that I think is worth watching. Now, it will be watched now as a historical document, and looking at it and going, how did this work back in the day? But that doesn't mean that it's not a good film. And it is. It's a terrific film with a great cast and one of the best directors of the 70s and 80s. I rest my case.
Right, thank you. Both sides have rested. The attorneys will now present their closing statement. Mr. Schlender, you may step out of the corner and present your closing argument.
I rather like the Dunset, though, so I'm going to keep that on.
It really
Don't
fits
you always wear that, Dylan?
I'm sorry about losing myself in the middle of talking about Dudley Moore. I don't know what happened.
Great stuff. He loves his Dudley Moore. Mr. Slender, your closing,
yeah. All right,
your closing
so
argument.
let us not mince words and waste time. 10 does not succeed on any of its intentions. We know Moore is capable of much more, given his performance in Arthur, playing a similar, though wholly more sympathetic character. We know Edwards is better at direction, given his turn at the Pink Panther films. Ultimately, this movie just leaves us wanting, and unlike Weber, we do not get anything we want, and I suspect even if we did, we would not like it all the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Majumdar, please present your closing argument.
First of all, if you have to criticize a film by making puns, you are done.
Oh no, that's our whole show.
That's a lot of the show.
You people. you people. You are seeing in 10. You are seeing in 10 a history lesson. You are seeing a film of its time, made by one of the great casts of its time. You are seeing a film that was a massive, massive box office success. You are seeing a director at his pomp. This is a film that was one of the most influential of its time. And I think in that sense, it's a film that must be seen.
Thank you. Members of the jury, Mr. Rob Maynard, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. Making Love to Ravel's Bolero, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
I'm about on my third midlife crisis. Dudley Moore is a lightweight.
Bailiff.
All right. I do kind of disagree with the defense on this, that you can't hold old movies to today's standards. I think you could sort of use the lens of the time that it came out with as sort of a mechanism of understanding why they made some of the choices they did, but that doesn't necessarily exonerate it in my mind.
Yeah, you have to hold up as a film. It's kind of part of
you
the
do have
bargain.
to hold up as a film, but one thing I think the defense said that really worked for me is that the film thinks George is a jerk. The film thinks George is a misogynist and certainly kind of entitled. And I don't know that you're supposed to really sympathize with him.
But it doesn't really say that it's a bad thing either. You know, it does say he is these things, but again, it doesn't he's still like one you're following around, and I guess it's thinking you want to root for him.
I don't really recall rooting for him, but I don't know.
I sure didn't, but that's because I'm watching it in today's time. Kind of reminded me of like Vacation, like where Chevy Chase is sort of not the family man, and they're sort of like making a mockery of that sort of thing. It seemed like that sort of thing to me. Like he's not a protagonist in the traditional sense. They're kind of like making a mockery of what you would consider a protagonist to be.
I don't think that there's really any point where you can sit and watch the movie and go, yeah, this is how people should be. But
I hope he wins.
But at the same time, I was really worried going into this that this would be a 2-hour farce about Dudley Moore's dick, and it turned out to actually get more complex as it went along.
Yes.
And it became somewhat of a character piece, which I appreciated because I hated his guts for about the first hour and a half. And I still hated his guts at the end of the movie, but at least I think I understood him better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing the prosecution brought up, there was a lot of like padding, right? Like we stayed for a long time with the singing priest, and just kind of took these detours that were a lot of times for humor, But like, to me, the heart of the film is really once he gets to Mexico and he kind of gets what he wants, and then realizes it just wasn't what it was cracked up to be.
And that's
That's
like
a
the third act almost. It felt
That's
like
a
It
very
is,
Blake
it
Edwards
is.
thing, though. Like, his movies are very bloated, typically.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you guys feel this guy's pain? You know, like he's a very successful person who's just, I have all this stuff and this beautiful woman I'm sleeping next to, but yeah, you know.
I mean, I will. I will say that, like, I couldn't see dating Julie Andrews and then being jealous.
Man,
of
I
everybody
failed.
else.
I hate this stuff that I'm doing. Man,
Because
my
Julie
life sucks.
Andrews is in her late 30s in this movie, and she's still totally breathtaking and classy and totally gorgeous. You know, I don't even know if Bo Derek in her late 30s looked as good as Julie Andrews does in her late 30s in this movie.
I don't know that she looked as good at the time as Julie Andrews.
That hair was very
cornrows
distracting. Like
is
the feathers to it with it. It was like I couldn't even focus on her. I was just like up on her scalp the whole time.
But what surprised me is Bo Derek. She's not like a total bubblehead at all. When she's really speaking her mind at the end, she's very liberated. She's very determined and willful, and she's basically like, you're not gonna make me feel shame, Dudley Moore. So it was almost like at the end, it all switched on me, and I'm like, oh my God, Bo Derek, I sympathize with incredibly. I kind of wish Dudley Moore didn't get Julie Andrews in the end. I wish he had just sat playing his piano alone, because he doesn't deserve Julie Andrews.
That's ultimately
The
where
record
it
joke
fails
was
is
funny, though.
judging the character is that, but he gets what he shouldn't deserve, but ends up getting
and
it
had
anyway.
all along, right?
Yeah.
And kind of had all along, absolutely. And the other thing that kind of stuck in my craw about this movie, it's kind of like, I think it's the prosecution said, like, the grass is always greener, right? Like, once you get what you want, it's not really what you want, so don't bother with it, right? And it's like, well, let me sleep with Bo Derek and make my own mind up. I'm willing to make the mistake, movie. I'm willing. That's a bear trap I'm willing to step in. But it was a well-made movie, and even not liking Dudley Moore's character, I like Dudley Moore. I'd like to say that there are a lot of actors who aren't as charming as Dudley Moore I would have hated this character, and Dudley Moore's so charming, he kind of ends up a little in the middle for me. So I'm gonna go not guilty, because there was a lot that made me laugh. And yeah, Dudley Moore, he can even make assholes somewhat charming.
Talk to me, RLR.
Okay. Boy. This movie has both the things that I enjoy about Blake Edwards and the things that I really do not enjoy at all. But I'm very much split down the middle. So whenever I'm split down the middle, I tend to not go negative. So I'm going to have to say not guilty.
Wow.
Okay. Unanimous so far.
This was not a film for me, but I'm not judging it based on whether it's for me. I'm judging it as its merits as a whole. I found this very boring, but as you said, it was well made. Like the filming, the acting, all of the intent that they had there doesn't really fall short of its mark. And I don't want to make this a unanimous vote, but still, my feelings is boring, but not guilty.
Hey, nothing wrong with unanimous. All right. Well, let's get out there and tell that very handsome judge.
Hey, wait, you can't say that.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus 10, we find the defendant not guilty.
Hurrah! Hurrah!
The verdict is so rendered. I hereby declare that 10 is free to go fritter away the rest of its days on the beach with pills, alcohol, and 23-year-old blondes. The court is adjourned.
This is Mumbling Mumberson, reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Mr. Dale and Judge Schlender, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, this was a tough case. It was a well-argued case. And anytime you can have Simon Majumdar yell at you, that's a personal win. You know, that's a personal win for me. So I'll take the moral victory, you know, and I could sleep well with 10 being not guilty. We put up the best case we could. I still believe in the Reels of Justice. And I think justice was done today. I think the movie got a very fair hearing. So I tip my hat to Simon, I tip my hat to the court, and I bid you adieu.
Thank you. That dunce cap looks very charming on you. Here comes
thank
Mr.
you.
Simon Majumdar. Excuse me, can we get a word how you feel about today's verdict?
Well, I'm glad that even with COVID brain, where I can't get some of my words out, I was pleased to get a non-guilty verdict, because this is a film that I realised that I really liked, and I hadn't seen for nearly 20, maybe 30 years. And it's made me want to go back and watch more Julie Andrews films. It's made me want to go and watch more Blake Edwards films, maybe even some Bo Derek films. It's made me just want to, it's made me miss that period of my life. And so I thank you for letting me go and watch it. I thank you for letting me tell the prosecution just what I thought of their reprehensible behavior.
Yes.
And I hope you will take this on board and maybe, look elsewhere, for that kind of nonsense. Sorry, I'm being really painful now. No, I think it was a great discussion. And as usual, I win.
Thank you very much. I really doubt that anybody wants to see Bo Derek movies. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
Oh, man. Simon,
mumbly.
well done, sir. And now that the courtroom is over, cards on the table, I also really like 10. I love Dudley Moore.
I still don't like the second act.
I get 10 2.5 out of 5.
The middle is muddy, but it's a strong beginning, a strong end, and it's just so hard to root against Dudley. I love Dudley Moore. He's just one of my favorites.
I saw Dudley Moore on stage playing, his piano. He was so, talented there, and telling comedy stuff, and he talking about his life with, Peter Cook and Beyond the Fringe, and it was, and this was, maybe 1920. I was, and it was one of the great nights of my life. And he was talented, and I just think, I wish he'd done more, and I wish that the films that he'd been in had been much better.
Yeah, I think you did a great job honoring him tonight. He's just done so much, and I think Arthur is just kind of like the synthesis of where 10 kind of laid the groundwork, and then he's fully realized in Arthur, and he just nails. Yeah, he probably should have been the best actor for that, I think.
I know, and the trouble is, I actually think Arthur is a worse character because that whole drunk thing in Arthur is something, and particularly in Arthur 2, is just something that I don't like. I don't like that acting drunk kind of thing that he did there. And so, if you'd have asked me to do Arthur, I'd probably have been on the prosecution.
Next time you can come prosecute Arthur. We'd be happy to have you.
Yeah.
Now, Simon, what's been keeping you busy? What have you been doing lately?
Well, I'm working on my podcast, which is called Eat My Globe, which is a food history podcast that I do with the Department of History at UCLA. So we're just going in to record season 7. One of the things, you will know this being cinema people, I'm actually going to be interviewing Lou Diamond Phillips about the history of food in cinema. He is going to come in and choose 5 of his favorite food films. So that'll be a great one. But we've got other things as well. We're filming different things for Food Network. I've just got a lot going on at the moment, and I'm also working on a book, but I can't say much about that now.
Oh, very excited for a new book, Fed, White, and Blue. Just everyone go out and buy that, read that right now. Great book.
Thank you.
And if you need a blurb on your book, we are experts at book blurbs.
We have the Reels of Justice here.
That is true. We have been blurbed. We have been blurbed on books. So if you need a positive blurb, we got you covered. Mm-hmm. So Simon, I love your podcast, Eat My Globe, because you get into such amazing detail in such a short amount of time. And I guess my question is why do you think food history is taken for granted or so underexplored? Because if anyone listens to one episode of your show, they're learning things they had no idea about before. Like,
Yeah,
it's all new.
I mean, it's things that you didn't know is what I kind of subtitle.
And that's perfect to describe it, for sure.
Yeah, and what it is that everything we eat, drink, has a history, and that can take you to all parts of history. You know, it all take you to all parts of time. You know, the man who invented canning was a champagne manufacturer who won a competition from Napoleon.
Because the army travels on its stomach, and he knew that.
Actually, it's funny you should bring up the guy who invented canning, because you talk about it in your military's ration episode, which actually I just listened to just while I was doing my workout, getting ready for the show. And I love to. One of the things you bring up is that the baguette was not invented for French soldiers to be able to store in their pants. So
spoiler alert when you drop those, Dylan. Jeez.
What I find is there are so many of these myths about food, and so you know, Marco Polo did not bring noodles back to Italy. People in New England did not protest because they were given too much lobster. All these things are total nonsense. But we find, interestingly enough, the thing about Marco Polo is that the reason people think he did that, it was in a magazine in the 1920s by the Pasta Manufacturers Association, and they made it up in the 1920s, and now everybody thinks that that's what's happened. The thing about lobsters being, causing protests because people ate them too much when they were in prison, is something that was told by a storyteller probably in the 1890s, but it never happened. So all of these things, there's so many of them, and I'd like to get rid of those. But I love to tell people the real stories, because there's so many people in there in history that people will really love, like the man who invented canning.
One of my favorite people you ever brought up on your show, and talk about something you never think about. You talked about the woman who invented the machine that makes paper grocery bags, and talk about something we take for granted. So that blew my mind. I think you had
Alton Brown.
Walter Brown on that episode, and you were discussing her, and you look her up, and it's just an extraordinary woman, and just really revolutionized the way we handle food in the whole country. It's extraordinary.
Absolutely, and particularly in the United States. Obviously, we don't have those in England when I was younger, but when you come here and you see that people go, well, I went to university and I paid my way by handling those carrier bags and taking them out to people's cars. You see amazing, actually, women, and since we've been talking about women with the film, the amazing women, the very first cookery books, or certainly of the style we have now, Hannah Glass and people like that, they are writing books that you could put out now, and in fact, a lot of people do. They put them out in editions now. So I think what I'm finding is the amount of women in food is really incredible. Another one, and this is a real one from the 1st century BC, a woman who created alchemy, or was certainly one of the people who created alchemy, and with that she created a still as we would use in gin distilling. Now I mentioned gin because I need one now.
Me too.
Yeah, and she, because of the still she developed, that's why we have gin distilling. Now she was doing it because she was trying to create lead into gold, but that same process will give us gin. And so
she almost found it. She makes it gold. She makes a gold of one style.
And the thing about that, if you have chance, I talk about gin in one of the episodes, and it was a gout cure. So you start looking at something that we think of as something you could buy at any supermarket or certainly any liquor store, and you're going, but it was a gout cure for the Italians. It was created by a woman who was trying to turn lead into gold. I mean, these things, I think, are just really interesting.
And it works. I've never had a case of gout, not a day in my life.
You're very lucky, mate. You're very lucky because I'm on so much medication for my gout, which is probably what I do for a living. But it's a horrible thing. So I'm glad that I'm allowed to have my gin every day.
Absolutely, and that's Eat My Globe, fantastic podcast. Everyone go subscribe to that right now. And Simon, we always ask our guests for a recommendation for a movie you think everyone should go out and see. What should our people at home watch?
For me, I would ask one of my favorite films, which is A Matter of Life and Death with David Niven.
Great movie.
I mean, to me, one of the great movies of all time. Powell and Pressburger. I think, obviously, they made another of my favorite films, The Red Shoes. But I think Powell, Matter of Life and Death is, I just think, one of the perfect films. You know, I don't think you would be able to do it on this show because I think if you think that's a bad film, there's something wrong with you.
We would put it up. We would put it up against another great film. So when we have a good film, we do head-to-heads like that.
Oh well, there are many that you could put up against it, but I think it would come out on top.
Awesome,
definitely a great one. I know you saw it recently, Ryan.
Yes, I did. I watched it about a month ago, and today I actually watched another Powell and Pressburger movie, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp.
Oh,
also really good.
Yeah, again, that's a film that I've been seeing for many years, and I think they were amazing directors.
Yeah, I agree.
Great one. Dylan, you were our lawyer today, so what is your recommendation?
Well, as we were talking about, I share a lot of affection with Dudley Moore, just like Simon does, and Dudley Moore was a big part of my childhood for two movies. As I mentioned last Christmas, his hilarious turn as an elf in the Schlender family favorite, Santa Claus the Movie. But my absolute favorite Dudley Moore memory was 1986's The Adventures of Mile and Otis. The film is narrated by Moore, and he provides all the voices for the live-action animals as they traverse across the country. The movie is profoundly sweet and a pure joy for children of all ages.
A great choice.
Children ages, right?
Yeah, well, all children, adults too. I got to revisit this with my kids recently, and it's just so delightful seeing the little cat and the little pug run around, and Dudley Moore doing those cute voices, and it's a great movie. It really is.
Benji could have used a lot more Dudley Moore. I'm just gonna say
Benji could have, Fletch could have, all dog movies.
He wouldn't have been so hunted if he had Dudley Moore as his narrator.
Not wrong. So, hey, Maynard, you were our judge. So what are you recommending this week?
I'm glad you asked. We're so lucky to have a prominent food historian with us this week. And it just so happens, entirely by coincidence, last night I watched 1994's The Road to Wellville. This thing used to play on Comedy Central nonstop in the late 90s. It spoofs, to a certain extent, the work of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, who we know famously as basically the inventor of the cornflake, among many other things. And this film specifically details his work as the head of the Battle Hill Sanitarium, where he promoted his very eccentric theories about clean living. It stars Sir Anthony Hopkins as Dr. Kellogg, Matthew Broderick, Bridget Fonda, John Cusack, Dana Carvey. It's absolutely bizarre, and most of Kellogg's ideas in this film seem completely insane to you and me, like yogurt enemas, for instance.
Oh,
but it inspired. It inspired.
May I just to? Am I allowed to not object because I want?
Yes,
to
you can. Yeah,
a little. He was a nasty man, Not only was it just his kind of crazy thoughts, which came about because most people in America had dyspepsia because people ate too much protein in the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. But he was also one of the few, one of the original people behind eugenics.
Yep.
He was basically a child molester. He basically put acid on the privates of his children, male and female, because he was really frightened of masturbation, and he thought that that was causing so many troubles to the world.
Yeah.
And so Alton and I, on that show that we mentioned earlier, we talk about him, and I refuse to allow him to be part of the Eat My Globe pantheon because he was a horrible, horrible man. And eating, and creating a breakfast doesn't get you away from that, I'm afraid. So whenever I hear his name, I get very, very angry. So
I'm glad it inspired. Yeah.
Sounds like riot.
Yeah, well, the film certainly isn't. It does not paint him as a great person at all. It doesn't go extreme because it is sort of a comedy, but it does. It shows his anti-masturbation stuff, his abstinence stuff. It covers all of that. But it inspired me to actually do some research on him after the movie, and I was shocked to find that the film was not so far off on his ideas. It just, the film frames that it's funny when he does it to Matthew Broderick. So the film is currently streaming on Tubi and Peacock, and may I suggest you pair it with a Petite Chablis, chilled, of course, and a generous yogurt enema.
Oh, God.
And a bowl of Frosted Flakes.
No, you can't do sugar on them. But Ryan, you're so sweet like sugar, you get to go next.
Oh, thank you. I don't have anything on topic to recommend, so instead I will pick something that I recently rewatched and loved, and that is Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy from 1990.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. It is the rare comic book property-based film where the filmmakers actually bothered to have every single frame represent a panel of the original strip, specifically the weekend newspaper, the full-color strips. I could write an entire dissertation on the mat work alone, but I won't do that. Dick Tracy isn't currently streaming for free anywhere, despite being owned by Disney, but you can rent it on iTunes, Amazon Prime, and Vudu.
Now, what about Sin City? Sin City does a lot of the straight lifts from the comic.
I didn't say it's the only one that did that.
But
Okay,
he said one of the few.
You're off the hook then. Big Ben, send us on home.
I'm going to recommend a movie that's 200.1 times better than 10, and that's 2001: A Space Odyssey. But I only recommend it in the context that you see it on a 70 millimeter projection with the state-of-the-art surround sound, because I saw this movie back in the day with VHS, and it did not do much for me. But in the theater, with that soundtrack and those special effects, it hits a whole new level. If you watch like a CGI-laden film like Jurassic World and compare it to this, they're not even comparable. See it in the theater. I pair it with popcorn and soda, I guess, because you're American. And I won't tell you where it's streaming, because see it in the theater.
Oh, Big Ben coming out of left field there. But guys, as we start to wind things down here, I would just like to remind our listeners that if you leave us an iTunes review and send us a screenshot of it on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook with the hashtag ROJ Reviews, you will be entered into an upcoming raffle for some really cool Reels of Justice swag.
That's true.
That's true. And
Ryan, do you have a thing?
Oh, I have one? I'm sorry.
Yes, always. Oh.
We didn't have one for the longest time.
You know what, Ryan? Speaking of reviews, here's a great one we got recently. No objections from me. I have been impressed with the quality. The care that goes into the show is apparent. From Linda A. Thank you, Linda. Now screenshot that review, shoot it to us on social medias with the hashtag ROJ Reviews, and enter that raffle to get some free stuff. Simon, shouldn't people leave us a review?
I think they should. You are doing a terrific show. I've really enjoyed myself, even though, as I say, I apologize. I had a bit of COVID brain in the middle.
And it's early for you, right? It's early.
Yeah. No, it's late.
But you were up late writing, so you only just got to get up.
I know. I've been having a little nap, but I've really enjoyed the show. It's made me look at films in a different way, because you have to defend them, which I don't normally need to do. I just enjoy or not enjoy myself. So I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Simon.
we're not
It was
allowed
an
to just
honor.
enjoy films anymore.
I know.
We have to dissect them and tear them apart.
Same with I have the same with food. So whenever I'm going out for dinner later on tonight, and whenever I do that, I often see people in the restaurant looking at me, whether it's other diners and looking to see if I'm judging, and I go, I'm just having dinner. So I can imagine with you, sometimes you just want to go, I just want to watch a damn movie. Leave me alone.
Yes.
Whatever the topic is.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. One of the food history things I always wonder is, who's the first person who figured out they could eat a coconut?
Someone who had it fall on their head.
Yeah. They like split it
cousin or
open
somebody?
and they're like, there was another rock in here. Well, what's inside of that rock? Milk.
It's delicious.
There's a lot of dead people out there who are the progenitors of all the things that we eat, who tried it and didn't last, and then the people after them went, well, if we do this instead, then we get to eat. And I guess that happened with coconuts. So there's probably lots of people on different islands around the world who started eating them, or started getting killed by them as they fell from trees. And then they broke open, and then their kind of colleagues went, oh, well, this is nice. We'll miss Igor. We'll miss X, but the coconut is nice.
Yes, we thank everyone who sacrificed their lives so that we could find out what food was edible. Thank you to you curious people who just try to eat everything you find.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And with that, we're all out of show for the week, but we want to thank our guest, Simon Majumdar, for joining us. Thank you, Simon.
My very great pleasure. It was really fun.
Yes, we had a great time too, and we hope that you will join us again in the future. And we hope that everyone else will join us again as well, as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Dialogues.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.